Yeah, instructions are so bad.
Good evening. Welcome to our work session this evening. It's a great opportunity to have some open discussion about some issues in the city. We appreciate those of you who have come to join us tonight. You're always welcome. We encourage you to attend or with us. We'll start our meeting tonight. We have with us Councilmember Swanson, who will give us either a thought, invocation, and then lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So, Councilman Swanson.
Just a quick thought. I think we've all heard that democracy is messy. And as I drove around and thought about today's meeting and some of the subjects and some of the meetings we've had recently, I'm especially grateful for those of you that make the effort to come be a part of the mess. It's good to not sit here alone and be in the mess with just the 5, 6 of us.
They could create a pretty big mess, just the 5 or 6 of
So
us.
we can create a really big mess. But for those of you that take the time out of your day to come, appreciate you being here. We stand and I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman Swanson. Appreciate your diligence. Thank you very much. We'll now go into our consent agenda. And council members, you've had a chance to look at the agenda. Until you have any conflicts of interest that will be disclosed regarding our discussions this evening. I don't see any, so we'll move into our active agenda. We'll now seek public comments. What we would ask for those of you who would like to make a comment, you step over near this microphone over here so that we can make sure we hear and the recording will hear you. As usual, we would ask you to limit your comments to 3 minutes, if you would, and if you would state your name. And if you're a resident of North Ogden, we would appreciate it. And just a reminder for us who have our cell phones with us tonight, if you would put those on silent, in case you get a call, we won't get interrupted. So we'll now go with public comments. If you'd like to make a comment, if you'd like to step up over by the microphone.
Won't break if I sit on it, will it? Promise. I'm Sandy Cochran. I am a resident of North Ogden, and I just have a few issues that I wanted to just maybe get some clarification on. So I live at Prominence Point. I've spoken with you guys a few times, and each time I've been told to read the development agreement. And so I got the development agreement. I did my best to try to read it and understand it. There's a few things that I'm a little bit muddy on. So when I read the agreement, it says to me that there are to be 28 patio homes. We actually only have 22 patio homes. There's one area of our development where the map originally showed 5 patio homes, and those, in actuality, those 5 homes have been replaced by 2 townhouse buildings. And I don't see where that change, I can't find anywhere where that change was authorized. So the 5 patio homes were replaced by 12 total townhomes in that area. And then in the original plan that I saw, there were 16 townhome buildings. And there were, I think, 122 units that were in the original plan. We now have 17 buildings. And if I counted correctly today, 135 actual townhomes. One other issue that I'm questioning is when I read the original agreement, and some other documents, I only heard discussion of single-story cottages or patio homes. And I'm wondering how those, I believe there are 4 two-story patio homes. I'm wondering how they got into the development. One other thing is, gosh, I didn't bring it with me, but there's in that development agreement, section 4B, it talks about how the developer will stay in compliance with all ordinances, rules, regulations, and something to that effect. And I'm thinking, or I've been told, the city has an ordinance, rule, or regulation on street lighting. We do not have street lights in our development. And the city, when I've spoken to you, I've kind of heard, because we were told until the clubhouse is built, we're not going to have street lights. The lights are connected to the clubhouse. I've talked to other people just going out and trying to educate myself. And the street lights could be operable if someone forced the developer to get a temporary power station and placed it there. I've heard it shouldn't cost more than $1,000. And I think no streetlights is a safety hazard for our community. We have more, and every time a townhome is sold, we have more kids living there. They're running around in the dark. It's getting darker earlier every night, and it's a concern to us. And we have this big open field where that condo unit is going. It's pitch black, and there aren't houses at the other end because of the issue with the creek, them not being able to build those patio homes. Then I have a question for you all. I don't know if you can answer this. I don't know if you have any control over it, but when I first moved in, I asked my realtor and she told me that there was something in the paperwork that said the development could only sell so many units to people who would not be residents as like rental property. She told me it was 15%, and I believe what we have now is a lot more than that. And one of my neighbors has said he read through the CC&Rs that Jack earlier this year changed and reissued. And he said that statement with the percentage is no longer in there. So I'm wondering if the city has a limit to the number of rentals allowed in a development like that. And I think that's all I have for now.
Sandy, those are good points. What I'm going to ask you to do is if you would set an appointment with Susan, come in and meet with John and myself, and we'll go through each one of those issues and answer your questions. I'm not sure we're prepared to answer those all tonight, but if you would get with Susan, John and myself will meet with you and we'll address each one of those issues. It's always been our stance that if there's violations of the development agreement or a city ordinance, that we'll make sure that we take appropriate action. Otherwise, it's difficult for us to get involved in those type of things. So if you would do that, we'll make sure we address each one of those issues. And thank you for doing your research and coming with facts
Great.
to look at.
Thank you. I would also like to invite every one of you to come out and look at our development because it's been sold as this luxury. And it would be if the place was kept clean and picked. There's junk all over in the condo field out there. There's a ladder that one of the construction crews left. The kids keep dragging it in the street to ride their bicycles over and jump it. There's just junk everywhere. The weeds are outrageous again. They never all got cut back. So I'd like you all to just come look at it. Thank you.
I know, I've been down there, so I know other council members have. Council, do you have any questions?
After you have your meeting with Sandy, could you report back to council
We will.
on each of those questions?
Yes, sir. We will do that. Okay. Any other comments this evening? All right, anybody, No one's joining us this evening electronically.
We do have some, including Councilwoman Ekstrom, but no comments at this point.
Okay. Welcome, Councilmember Ekstrom. Thanks for joining us. We'll now then go on to item number 3, which will be led by Scott Hess, our planning director. And as Scott comes over to the microphone, I want to thank him for his diligence in looking through the agreement. He's gone through each item and responded. And I know that took a lot of time on short notice, Scott, so thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So why don't you go ahead and let us know what your thoughts are, what we need to do.
Okay, so first I want to express my gratitude to Rob Scott for his diligence and the staff, planning staff, and then also members of the public and other development teams who have worked on this and provided comments. I mean, there were 5 letters that I responded line by line to those issues with, and that's extremely helpful for us. I kind of gave that all to you in one big lump. Apologize for that. And over the weekend had a bit of an epiphany of how I could have or should have organized that information for you, and took some time today and did that. So I've got just a supplement to my staff report, my notes, and I've got it into buckets of actions that the planning department is recommending taking, and then those items that sections basically that staff has responded to but are recommended to remain as is. Just will also state, upfront that this ordinance was long-standing. There's been, I think there were 7 planning commission meetings on this. Rob Scott had been working on it for a year and a half. It has come a long ways, and I don't have 100% of the background on any of it. So understand that these staff recommendations are coming from my interpretation of what's happened to date, and happy to take any amendments, considerations that the council has and even others have, so that we make sure that we do this correctly. So
it was long-standing. There were 7 planning commission meetings on this. Rob Scott has been working on it for a year and a half.
That was important to know.
that was important enough to say
Wow.
it twice.
Not sure why YouTube decided to unmute itself.
I don't know, hearing yourself in a recorded voice is the worst. I'm sorry you all have to listen to that. Okay, so actions the planning department's recommending taking, and because the 5 different notes came in with some call outs specifically to sections of the codes, some that were just elements within the code, I did this alphabetically, and I think that's the easiest way. So it's not referencing exact red lines in the code. The code that you received that was all redlined is actually the same one you got back in May, the last meeting that Rob had. So there's been no recommended changes to the code itself. What we're really going through are just those staff comments in each of the summary letters. So first is approval requirements, and this is in reference to the landscape plan. So a comment made about it having kind of onerous rules and requirements to have landscape plans come in, that those are really things related to master plan communities and HOAs. Staff feels like those are all standard requirements of the development, but there was a note in there about final approval as it relates to our regular process for preliminary and final approvals of subdivisions. And staff is going to recommend that we review all of our approval processes to just assure that they're consistent with other sections of code. And that's one thing you'll know as most of these.
Which document do you want up? On this one?
I should have just given you this one, but it's any of those memos basically. So I don't have them because I reorganized this alphabetically. I can't even tell you like memo A through E.
Okay, just sorry.
Yeah, no, that's helpful.
Scott, so if I understand correctly, you'll do a review, and if they're consistent, then you're recommending that the ordinance stay as written.
Yeah, in some cases, or that we pull that language out and just reference that line item in our existing code. So like the preliminary and final plat process, unless there's a substantive reason to keep them separate, just, reference our existing standards. Yep. Building heights, there is a call out in there about maximum building height. I think that as I've been here and we've already had to do, we've done one variance already for a home that's 2 stories tall in the code that didn't meet our 40 feet on the front from top back of curb or 55 feet in the rear from top back of curb. staff is already looking at how the city measures total heights of homes and using averages. And we're willing to amend this provision to assure that reasonable homes are able to be built in all single family zones in North Ogden. So that staff's recommendation would be that essentially by right, you should be able to build a 2-story home, within reason, not mega tall, in any single family zone in the city. And that would include those areas up on the hillside.
And our fire marshal is okay with those being 55 feet up.
Well, over a certain height, that's a great question. There are some real tall homes, but over a certain square footage, it's not about the height. Over a certain square footage, homes are sprinkled, and that depends on the water zone. So it's possible that some of those areas up there, if they don't have pressurized water or enough storage, that's going to restrict the size of the homes anyway. That desire to have, yeah, go ahead, Commissioner. Did you have a comment, question, otherwise?
Most of these homes are only 2-story. And then they go over the height by having a big steep roof. So it is something to look at. 2-story means we can still reach them. 3-story, we can still reach them.
And in most of those cases, 2-story still means from the curb. So 2-story is always from the public right of way. But it's in those cases where you have a downhill lot, the backside of that lot can be 4 stories tall. You can have a daylit secondary basement. We have a few of those in North Ogden. The next is in definitions and interpretations. There's a call out. Can you just give me the attachments list, John, or to have that up just so that I can reference the name? So in Richard and Sherry Hall's letters, they had a number of call outs for vegetation, open space, and parks that seemed to conflict with one another, that there wasn't one clear definition in the entirety of that sensitive lands ordinance for each of those. So staff would like to go through, make sure that there's clarity in the ordinance in those particular instances. There's a requirement in there for density, on density, that you've got a 15,000 square foot lot size. And the comment was that that is more restrictive than other areas of the city. Staff's comment is that it is and it isn't, because we also have an RE20 zone requiring 20,000 square foot lots, but 15,000 square foot is more restrictive than the HP1 and HP2 zones, which are 10,000 and 12,500 respectively. Go ahead.
We're talking about some sensitive areas here. So I think to compare that to non-sensitive areas where we know we've got risk of landslides, and fault lines and things of that nature.
Yep.
I'm not sure we can say that it should be uniform to other places in the city.
No.
If it was, we wouldn't be having this sensitive lands ordinance.
So staff's recommendation is to maintain the 15,000 square feet. I think that is appropriate, but and we'll see this in the PUD section, but to consider in the density requirements some ability to do PUD, so that's planned unit development provisions or other clustering designs to provide options for developers in laying out their property development proposals. So then 15,000 square feet would become the base density calculation, and then they could do smaller lots in those areas that are less restricted, fewer steep hillsides, that sort of thing. There's call out, there's some specific notes in there regarding floodplains, and some real good comments and points made about we're potentially stepping into FEMA floodplain areas with some of the bits and pieces of this code. So staff would, and I've met with the city engineer, but we'd like to review that and make sure that these sections are consistent with the city's current floodplain analysis requirements. And this is also with regards to low impact development, drainage, and floodplain elements, that we'd like to compare those to the existing standards. And in some cases, they actually are the existing standards. And so folks read it as though we're doing an additional step, but really what we've done is just added bits and pieces of existing code or standards to the code. But we just, again, want to make sure that there's consistency between those two things in the time between this, when this was written and today.
So would you just reference the existing code then?
Yeah, we may just end up referencing the existing engineering standards, which is probably a cleaner way to write code, because then if the engineering standards get updated, it's we don't have to recreate circular references. Grading has the same issue. Planning staff will review sections, all sections in regards to grading with the city engineer to assure that drainage and grading requirements are consistent, and low impact development, same exact thing, to make sure that those are consistent. You know, we put a lot of work into our LID standards, and so there's no reason to have a different LID standard up on the hill that isn't in the current standards. And if there is a reason for that, we just need to build it into the existing standards. PUD provisions, there was a call out or request that, well, it was pointed out that our planned unit development provisions or cluster subdivision provisions should be or could be applied to the HB 1, 2, and 3 zones, as well as potentially other single family residential zones where that makes sense. R18, R110, R112, and RE20, especially within those areas identified in the future general plan map as conservation areas or other areas the city desires cluster development. And I think that's an easy way to not write new ordinances, but rather just permit this PUD provision through our existing ordinances. Slope, there's cross-cutting. You can only cross-cut a 200-foot length total of cross-cutting 20% slope. So if you have a steep slope, this is saying that you can only traverse that slope for 200 feet. And the comment is that you can safely traverse those steep slopes for much longer distances. The trade-off is your cut and fills. You know, you might cut across a steep slope and you get a lesser slope that a fire engine might be able to go up, but you might have to live with a hillside scar in order for that to happen. A big component of the slope limitation here is that if you look at the slope map, and I included that in your packet, those areas over 20% are pretty minimal. So while it might feel like an overreach or like we're really limiting development potential, it's on such a small percentage of land. And here's the slope map that John's pulling up now. And areas of the darkest red are your 20% plus slopes. And you can see that crescent shape is an undevelopable avalanche like fallout. Basically, it's a catchment basin. But this area to the right, hugging right near the mountain, and here, I'll just show you.
Is that long bench, the big long swell there, that's long bench?
This would be avalanche catchment basin essentially.
Oh, that's on there.
A long bench, but you've got a few areas up here where you're starting to hit that between 10 and 20 slopes. That's the lighter pink, and then 20 plus degree slopes are the darker reds. So here are some of those areas where you have potential for longer than 200-foot runs, cuts across steep slopes, but it's pretty limited in its application where we think that would be practical. So staff is certainly willing to review and amend the distance requirement, but I would want to confer with our fire marshal that we have fire equipment that can get across those slopes, those extended steep slopes potentially. And I also, just in talking to our city engineer, I think that the impact is actually more perceived than it is reality of those 20%.
The dotted line is our annexation map
It is.
boundaries,
Yep. So
or current city boundaries.
correct. So this is city boundary. So this is the cove right here. Areas over here, this is Pleasant View City.
Right.
And so we would be seeing development between the existing cove. This is Mountain Road. And here, and then we have, this is all our annexation boundary. So our city line runs kind of like this. And we've got some areas. So this large swath here that is currently for sale and has, I think we've either seen development proposals on that, or it's certainly developable as a stub. Really, the only limited area between 10 and 20% slope is the far top, top right corner. And I'm not even certain we have the culinary water ability to provide services up in that area anyways. There's a provision on vegetation disturbance. So The provision 1127-4B1 states all areas on development sites cleared of natural vegetation in the course of construction of offsite improvement shall be replanted with revegetation, which has good erosion control characteristics. Each provision in this section is basically related to offsite improvements, detention trails, roads, other upfront development impacts, and there's really no relation to the building activities that happen on any one individual lot. The comment that was made was, you're limiting a person's ability to provide fire protection around their structure if you can't take the vegetation off the individual development lot. And that's not, it's not what that was specifically referring to. So staff's recommendation, we could certainly clarify the provisions in the section to assure homeowners have the right to protect their structures and clear brush and vegetation as needed. Staff's desires to protect existing vegetation really to the largest degree possible because it's doing its job up there already of holding the hillside in place. So we want to strike a balance here. Clear cutting areas may make development easier, but it also increases runoff potential for erosion issues and isn't really in the vein of what a sensitive lands development ordinance should be. So that's the end of the provisions that are for us, basically to take action on. Those sections recommended to remain as is. There's a question on the applicability statement. Applicability statements in code they're standard. They're used to identify which zones or areas the city ordinances relate to. They're not typically codified. You have to make a pretty convincing, compelling legal argument to lean on an applicability statement for any reason. So I think it should stay because it's fairly general and it relates to those areas of the hillside we want to protect. Construction time frame, there's a limitation in development between October 1 and April 15. And in years of low water, we understand that creates minimal impact. However, there were a few years ago, in 2019, it started raining in the spring and didn't stop for 6 weeks. And I know because I was trying to put a yard in and my yard was just a mucky mess. In those sorts of years, that can cause a major issue with hillside development. So the code is written, it doesn't disallow development, but rather asks for a sensitive approach because it says development is of a nature that will minimize disturbance of vegetation cover. So it's not an outright you can't do it, but you certainly couldn't go up there and clear cut 5 acres of vegetation. You'd want, if you're going to put the roads in, you want to put them in, you want to follow road base, compact it really quickly. So I think to me, it's more about having the plan in place than it is about a restriction of development.
So how do you define, Scott, of nature that will minimize disturbance of vegetation cover? And who makes that determination?
Hello in there. That's a good question. It's either the planning director or the building official in the code that's going to make that determination. But those sorts of calls are oftentimes made in a pre-construction meeting that has your city engineer, public works, planning director, fire marshal, that helps everybody understand the nature of the development and the time frame that it's going to happen in. So we could add clarity to.
Yeah, it would seem like to me if we could get that group you just referenced together to have some definition, I think that would be fair. Otherwise, it's pretty subjective, maybe what mood people are in that day. So if we could get some further definition, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, that's great. The Bruce Parker's letter kind of hinges in many ways on that the hillside or the sensitive lands ordinance should all be related to personal property and kind of providing safety, health, safety, welfare of personal property and life and limb. So he, being a professional planner, and I know Bruce really well, I have a great working relationship with him, but he went through this with a fine tooth comb and found that there are some sections of this that are really design standards. And I agree, and that we have some design standards in our sensitive lands ordinance, but they have to exist somewhere. So what you either do is you put those design standards into the HP 1, 2, or 3 zones, and then you have a reference back to them, or you leave them in the sensitive lands ordinance because that covers a large swath of area, and then you have to utilize those. And it's belt and suspenders. It doesn't matter which way you do it. But I think it's fine as is, because if I were doing the review of the development up in the area and I knew that it was overlaid with the sensitive lands ordinance, I would check my zoning code first and then the standards of the sensitive lands. So it doesn't matter which direction.
How would a development agreement hold into that? Because I think basically, when we're talking about that portion of our city, there's gonna be probably some development agreements, if I understand it correctly. Really, that's the only way you can kind of have any control over any type of studies at all.
Once you know, so this, yeah, that's a good point. That's a fair point. Once you start entering the realm of a development agreement, you either say all codes and restrictions within these particular city ordinances exist, plus you have to follow this, or it becomes its own zone altogether. So like our MPP zone, our MPC zones end up being their own zoning code to a large degree, with the exceptions being maybe signage and street standards. But even those, like we have narrower streets in some of those. So that is totally on how you craft the development agreement.
I'm just wondering, council, it seems like that's something that we'd be maybe interested in doing, but I don't know, council, what are your thoughts?
Charlotte has her hand raised.
Hi, yes, do our sensitive lands areas cross over multiple residential zones? Or are they all kind of in the HP1, HP2 zone, or do we have some other zones? That's my question. So when we're talking about design standards, do we need to just have them apply to the sensitive lands, or do they need to go into all of the other zones that those cross? Does that make sense?
It's right now, you've got areas in HP 1, 2, 3, and RE20 that fall in the sensitive lands, because as the city wraps to the east and south, you pick up lands RE20 that are east of Mountain Road. So
as the developer wants to develop in a particular area, it's got to have kind of two designations. It can be in any one of those HP zones or in RE20. Then it's in an additional sensitive lands designation. Is that what I'm understanding correctly?
correct. And what the sensitive lands designation does to a large degree is clarifies that the geotechnical work that needs to be done there is going to specifically address kind of site by site the differences that exist up there, and the development will follow those geotechnical report requirements. So whether you're developing RE20 at 20,000 square foot lots or HP1 at 10,000 square foot, the real question comes down to, do you have steep slopes, fault lines, alluvial fans, other geomorphology issues that you've got to deal with in your development that are those are going to largely shape the development beyond what the underlying zone is. The underlying zone is really just the number of parcels that you can get on any one of those pieces of property to a large degree.
Okay, would it be advantageous at all to put all of the sensitive lands in a particular zone? Like this is now a zone, a zone like a residential zone, or do we want to keep them in all of the different ones that they have because they have different topography or whatever you want to, for the lot sizes, I guess, and restrictions?
I would say some flexibility is probably better, because the city on the east and south side is it's a much different animal than developing above Mountain Road on the hill between Mountain Road and the power lines. So I think I would guess each one of these developments is going to be its own, it will have its own challenges, its own unique type of development, as opposed to us saying it's a blanket X type of zone. But that's, that's my reckoning.
All right, thank you.
And I looked at this, and now I don't even remember which specific of these are design standards, because design standards not in the way of saying like you have to have hardy board houses, but it was in some of the development itself, the way the development is designed. Like you could argue that a 200-foot length across a 20% slope is really a design standard, because it's going to limit your road steepness and lengths. And so you're affecting the design of the development based on some of these density or not density, sensitivity standards. But I think that they're going to be specific to those areas that are deemed as more sensitive.
Scott, how does that apply to the law that was recently passed by the state, where they were really discouraging design standards
Yeah,
in zones?
I don't think any of this has, none of this has to do with the like colors or where the garages are located or the materials on the houses, because that's what was pulled out of the city's ability to control our design standards as it comes down to aesthetics of any one individual home.
That's clear, you feel like it.
Yeah.
So,
John, can you bring back up that slope map, please? I'm trying to get a full understanding of the different areas represented here. Obviously, the dark reds are 30% plus, right?
Yep.
So what if, I'm just going to step up here for ease of, is this a 10 to 20?
Yes. Yeah, it's right here. Sorry, the legend's just. up
Well,
above
I
me.
understand that. I'm just trying to find the different colors between
Yeah,
0 to 10. So what is all this shaded area here? Because if you scroll down, we get on the flat, then it becomes all white where we have, so this is obviously 0 down here. Then as we start to scroll down just a little bit, John's, a little bit more. But as we start moving up the hill, we start getting, so is this the 10 to 20 from the legend?
I think it is. I think there's only the 4 colors, so that light pink is the 10 to 20.
so yeah, 10 to
The
20
light
is
pink
the-
is the 10 to 20 area, this light. And what is this darker pink but not red?
20 to 30.
This is the 20 to 30.
Yeah.
Okay,
the dark red's 30 plus.
And then 30 plus.
and yeah, that's obviously 30 plus. Okay. Just wanted to make sure I understood what I was saying.
Yep. Okay. So next comment is on the general plan. There's call outs that this code is being written very loosely related to any components of the general plan. In fact, it says that there's no policy basis for doing this. And I just point out that while the state requires us to have a general plan, that gives cities general planning authority to do zoning, they're not obligatory documents. So also, the city has a duty to develop in a sensitive manner, and this includes protection of health, safety, welfare of current and future residents, as well as, in at least staff's opinion, protecting assets such as open space, access, recreation. And so staff feels the ordinance meets the intent of North Ogden's future goals, which inherently meets the intent of the general plan. There were a lot of comments. I've got 4 bullets on various responses to the geotechnical study requirements. So all property, whether you're in the flats or you're up on the hills, all property when it develops in the city is pursuant to the requirement of having a geotechnical study. And those geotechnical studies run the gamut from, what should the design of the foundations be? What's the soil type that you're dealing with? We have a lot of to me was unsuspecting really high water table in the city, and that is creating a lot of restricted lots, which are places you can't have a basement. They're just slab on grade construction. And that runs up the hillside as well. So you're not only dealing with the things you typically think of hillside development, like steep slopes or landslide areas, but you've got water table issues up there on the hillside as well, or creeks that run part of the year. And if you don't know the hydrology of the area, it might, you run up there right now and you might say this is completely dry, but for 4 months out of the year, water's just pouring out of the hillside.
I think we've seen some residents who said streams were rerouted inadvertently and it ended up flooding their basements. And I think obviously the geotechnical is really important.
Yeah.
I've seen homes that were built on clay that basically collapsed. Even in our general area, we've had hillsides starting to slide. It's created some safety issues for residents.
And our city engineer is extremely knowledgeable about the hillside and came in and did some good education with me on, we have a pretty massive alluvial fan kind of north of the Mason Cove area. that when you zoom out 1,000 foot level, you can see, but that's just an historic, I mean, I say historic, thousands of years old landslide in that area. And so you could dig down 100 feet and never find the fault line, but it's likely under there. You know, we understand that that's a different whole area of the city than the traditional ground and rock that you're dealing with up there on the hillside. There were also a number of call outs in these studies that basically preserving trails, access to open space, preserving existing vegetation isn't a health, safety, or welfare issue. And I guess potentially not, but in the vein of what a city's obligation is for sensitive development, we require trail access at any and all developments. We just had one in the flats and we required a trail through a 6-foot wide sidewalk per the trail plan. We require open spaces in nearly every development to some degree. And these all directly relate to open space and access as a public good as it relates to adding new rooftops to your house or new rooftops to the city. So we want to be aware that developers, don't come in and propose open spaces that are entirely unusable in their configuration. Like they might be a good place to roll that ball down a hill, but they may not be true usable open spaces. And I think that still meets the intent and the duty of the city in ensuring future development is beneficial for current and future citizens. And that's not to say that every open space needs to be a flat playground park. Lakeview Park is a beautiful example of a hillside park that's relatively undeveloped, but not every park should be that either. So trying to, again, strike a balance. I think the code does a good job, and most of this is all theoretical until you have a development sitting in front of you. It's easy to poke holes in it until you actually attempt to lay something out on the hillside, and then we can address it. I think that I would say with this being a new kind of overlay area in the city, that we be open to friendly amendments as they make sense to make development possible. And I think that we are in all other manner of the city as well. I've got a couple of other comments that kind of follow those same vein. There was a comment that requested that who is reviewing these geotechnical reports, and that a third party engineer should be reviewing it. Kind of went down the road of that, of thinking about writing language that would say, how will we pay for that? What will we do? But after discussing with city engineer and public works, we largely accept the results of those geotechnical studies. It's not, we didn't stamp those. So if a geotech says build a house a certain way and then that house falls off the hill, we're not the liable party. We did our due diligence in requiring the report. The builder built the report. You can kind of go down the line. So I think that, again, it's a hypothetical that we don't need to cross. If there's a glaring issue in a geotech, and I've seen those before, at times you ask the developer, get us a report that actually meets the requirements, and or if the city really wants to push back, we can one at a time hire our own third-party engineer and go out and do a geotech. That's certainly within our possibility. We don't need to codify that, because I think the vast majority of these would be, we read and review those geotechs, and then we pass that information on to the building department, who assures that the plans meet the requirements of the geotech. So I don't think we need a third party. There's an impervious surface. There's limitations on I think it's a 30% total impervious surface requirement. That's roofs and asphalt, driveways, everything up there in that area. That is more restrictive than our normal. Normal is 50%. So you can cover 50% of any lot in North Ogden with some amount of impervious surface, concrete, rooftop, accessory buildings. But increased impervious surface leads to more runoff. You've got to catch that runoff. So if we up that number, they're going to have to meet those storm detention requirements up there on the hillside, which I think with low impact development are going to have a difficult time doing. So there's a balance there. And again, it's really theoretical until you start to build homes and properties up there. And, it comes down to the question of, large homes by right, is are sport courts by right is, or some areas of your city, places that you develop in a more sensitive manner that might have less of that hard surface material and more natural vegetation.
Scott, that seems like a real safety issue because of the general slope up there and having that run down the hill onto residents below.
Yeah.
Well, it seems to be different than if somebody's got a sports court where, you know, the slope is great.
Yeah. I think, again, I would be willing to entertain friendly amendments to it in those areas where it makes sense. So if you're on the east and south side and you've got an RE20 type of development that seemingly acts more like some of those other areas, you know, around 3100, then maybe we fine tune this in the future so that we're not onerous on certain developments. And that's totally applicable, but to try to think of every single one of those issues up front, I think is really difficult until we start to see them come in. There was
What's your recommendation to leave it at
just
30?
leave, yeah, leave it at 30. There were questions about how the sensitive lands were
Scott, can you
identified.
just back up for just a second?
Uh-huh.
As we're talking about this impervious surface, John, can you bring up the slope map again? If we look in the, you can find Lakeview Drive there. Just below where you are, John. Come straight down, right there, right through that area. That area and south down to 3300, down to 3100, that whole area right there. That's all fully developed.
Yep.
Right? And that's the same kind of slope that we're looking at generally in the Nebo area up in there.
Yeah.
So if the 50% impervious hasn't created an issue here, why do we suppose, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here,
No, that's great.
because these are questions that are going to be asked.
Mhm.
If it hasn't created any hazards there for decades, right? That Lakeview area has been around for quite some time.
Yeah.
Right, 30 years plus, Blake. And we got some monster storms, monster rains, monster seasons, and it hasn't created any issue downstream.
Yeah.
Why would we then suppose that the same slopes higher up on the same kinds of soil would be more of a hazard than what we've already done?
And I don't know if it's proximity to our regional detention basins, that the distance that water travels before it's ultimately caught, captured, or dealt with is lesser, but that is,
Well, what percentage, I guess, that's a good point, Councilman Swanson, but I'm looking at this and it seems like there's more slope as a percentage of what we're talking about here versus that. Am I off on that?
Well, if you're looking right in here, the density of the slope, those light pinks, this in through here is no different than this in through here, or this in through here, or this, or all of this. So if this area here has been safe for decades, some areas 40, 50 years, why are we, on what facts and figures, not supposition, subjective things, what facts and figures are we using to say this is more dangerous, this is going to create more problems?
And that's a good point, but I'm saying look at the steepness of that mountain that runs into there versus over here, how close that is to the mountain, so.
Oh, you're saying in this part here?
Yeah, you get more water running off that into there, I'm wondering. I see your point, it's a valid point. I'm just saying, when you see that water, Laura?
One thing that has changed that Lakeview didn't fall under these requirements, but currently all new development has to comply with the LID.
Okay.
Which they have to retain all the water that's generated from small event storms.
Right.
And keep it on site.
Right.
So we have to have enough land pervious soils to handle that water.
Okay, so that's really the issue.
That is one change that's happened since the Lakeview.
Since the other time where we can ship it to another part of town or whatever. Okay.
Councilman Barr?
What makes sense to me, I'm a flatlander down here. You get more snow than I do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And you don't got that much higher slope. So the further we're going up the hill, we're going way up by the time we get up, and they got a lot more snow, a lot more rain.
Our,
We said, we gotta.
our
we can't let it
snowplow
flow.
drivers, the further go up the hill, the more time they're spending and the more snow and trying to put it somewhere. And that just develops more runoff also.
Right. No, that makes sense. But I think it's important that we talk openly about those things,
Right.
right? Because those are questions that if I were a developer, I'd want to know. How come that slope there gets a more impervious space than I do on the same slope?
They
There's been
also,
changes.
the further you go up the hillside, the stronger the storms are,
Right.
the higher intensity, the more water that's actually generated from the storm.
All right, yeah.
So they may be getting 2 inches of water up here where you get 1 inch down on the valley.
Right.
So we're generating more water
Right.
automatically on the storm.
Good question.
Yeah, very good. Okay, the next were comments about how the map identified the areas that were sensitive hillside. And I mentioned that there have been 7 planning commission meetings. They reviewed multiple maps and overlays of maps, the hill slope map being one of those. Sensitive lands were generally identified to those as those that were known steep slopes, potential fault lines, slope movement areas, and those areas of the hillside which have yet to develop. So staff understands each parcel is reviewed on its own merit with geotechnical work related to each parcel's unique characteristics. And inclusion in the sensitive area overlay zone, I don't think, personally, staff doesn't feel it represents an undue burden so long as the property owner, especially if the property owner can show that the site doesn't have any increased safety hazards through the geotechnical analysis. You know, those properties that would be contested and say, you're limiting our ability to develop or you're having onerous burdens put on us. The first blush basic geotechnical study would come out with, these are the recommendations on this site and no others. Whereas the other part is, you do that same kind of initial checklist through the geotech study and you start to poke holes and find all of the other issues that you need to address as you find it. So I would say the basic level of like geotechnical analysis work is probably similar. And then you enter down the rabbit hole depending on each site's individual characteristics. So those areas that are identified as sensitive lands, which have limited sensitive land, but applicability, are going to be able to develop under the same course as a R1 or an HP1, HP2, something else that's a hillside property. There were questions on the purpose statement. Again, kind of similar to applicability statements. Purpose statements are written into code to help identify generally what this code is doing, but they're not, you really can't lean on them. And I'll point to a recent example in the purpose statement of residential city center. It talks about 1-family and 2-family dwellings. However, in the permitted uses, there are no 2-family dwellings because that was taken out of the code after the code was written. It was an oversight not to pull it out of the purpose statement. You can't lean on a purpose statement to make legal decisions on what is and isn't permitted in that code. So I would keep it as it is. If we need to tweak it minorly some language, but again, I think it just comes down to when you read something and you interpret it versus what it's actually saying. The other piece is, again, back to Bruce Parker's comments talking about this should all be public safety related. Staff feels like protecting access and enhancing open spaces, parks, trails, other publicly accessible recreation is a vital and logical goal for cities as they can consider development. It shouldn't just be roads, streets, infrastructure, and new houses hitting the ground. So I don't see a problem with leaving that information. Scope and application, that kind of back to, we understand that each parcel would be treated individually in these areas. Sensitive lands are identified to be those areas of known hillsides, proximity fault lines, or other geographic features. And then the last one, and this was a big one in some of the comments, and it just fell last in alphabetical order, but slope. So there were a handful of comments in those letters about you're restricting our ability to develop because you won't let us develop over a 20% slope. And looking backwards to the history, that's been in the city code since at least 2018. I don't know what the history was prior to that, but looking at the map, slope map and discussion with Lauren Gardner, that there's really few areas of the city that fall between that 20 to 30% slope. So again, while this seems like a provision that limits development, because they said, I think it's Bountiful or Cottonwood Heights, some of these other cities allow development in between 20 and 30%. But I think it's because there's a larger percentage land area wise of their city that falls in those. So it would have been a greater taking of property rights if they wouldn't allow development in those areas, where for us, you know, you might be restricting in single digit percentages people's property or ability to develop. And again, if we come up with a property and they say, you've taken away 20% of our development right, maybe we do a development agreement, some really specific requirements in that area to allow them to develop. Or maybe it's, you know, you want a piece of property that has real steep slopes, and this is our requirement, and we've applied it consistently across the city since at least those last 3 years, and I don't know what happened prior to that. But it doesn't seem like an undue burden to retain the 20% slope, just based on our slope map and our analysis up there.
I'm assuming that's a safety issue. Lauren, do you remember why we came up with the 20 to 30 back in 2018? Because we're talking about safety issues here. I mean, over 30% is just generally unbuildable, unless you're like building, and it's essentially unbuildable. Between 20 and 30, probably with respect to really specific parcels, maybe, but it's a trade-off. Again, it's a cuts and fill trade-off. To develop that 20% slope, you just have to cut back more of the mountain. You have to retain more of the mountain to do it. And you're not doing it in areas, you know, you're doing it in areas that if there is land movement, you're above a lot of other existing development. It's not like you're isolated up there and completely separated. Development in North Ogden really hasn't leapfrogged itself. It's all built straight up the mountain and is supported by the development below it. So,
and another issue, the size of the lot to develop on a 20 to 30% slope, you can't just take a 10,000 square foot lot and put a home on it. It has to be much larger, because you've got setbacks, you've got to provide some kind of yard or space, and it's not all building. It just has to expand the size of the lot to be able to handle developing in that type of thing. So,
and that supports the clustering recommendation or provision too, that if you have larger swaths of land that inherently get steeper as they move up or up those canyons, pulling that density down onto the flatter, easier to develop spots will be fewer miles of roadway you have to manage, fewer miles of pipes, all of those things, same number of overall development rooftops, but in a configuration that may look much different than, say, the Cove does. So those are staff's recommendations of things to retain based on the comments that we received, and then those that to change. So I entertain any comments or questions, clarifications you have, and then next steps would be staff would present to you a non-redlined version, just a clean copy. This is the ordinance with these recommended changes, and move it forward from there on the basis of still the Planning Commission's recommendation for approval in, I believe it was April this year, on the heels of all of their meetings, to try to bring this to a conclusion.
Council, any further questions for Scott?
I just had a comment.
Hey, Councilmember.
God, I really like your approach to this. I think it's kind of a broad brush where we can broad brush it, right? But then I think each individual parcel is going to be very particular and need particular amendments to it. I kind of like treating this much more as a living document, where we have kind of general guidelines saying that these lands are particularly sensitive, but having kind of the flexibility to work with any individual parcel as needed, because there's lots of different things, lots of different topography and geotechnical issues that are going to come up in any particular one lot or another. So I like that approach to it that you suggested.
Scott, this really isn't general. What it would take is an exception to the ordinance.
Yep.
So it's,
So it'd either be through a variance with our hearing officer by showing that something is more, these are already areas that are unique of the city. So this area is particularly unique and it needs a variance. And or the developer asks for a staff-driven friendly text amendment, which adds time and uncertainty to developments. Or we just require them to make the application and run it through that.
so it's more specific than a broad brush, if I understand.
Yeah.
But there is some flexibility.
Scott, I had a question. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, you, Aaron.
Go ahead, Council.
I was just gonna say, the comment, the last comment before the conclusion.
Yeah.
Unless an ordinance or ordinance provision promotes public safety, that provision should be removed. I didn't seem to find anything that didn't have anything to do with public safety.
Yeah, basically anything, that's Bruce's comment saying that anything related to parks and open space preservation or vegetation preservation, if it's like the longstanding scrub oak, that those should all be stripped out of the sensitive lands ordinance.
Oh,
And that's where I disagree with that premise. I think that the city has a responsibility to develop sensitively everywhere, really, and that it is in our, our interest, in the public's best interest to make sure that developments don't unduly burden those things. And that we, there's already, I know that Parks Department would love to have more park space in the city. We're halfway to our build out goal and we're gonna have more people, and more people cause, congestion in parks, and that can be programmed and or just trail access. So these areas, as they develop, one of the benefits for the people who will live there, and then also the residents of the city, is that I would expect better open space access coming out of some of these developments than we have today, or more accessible via parking lots or drive up to them.
Which they seem very flexible to do.
Yeah.
And then just really quickly, I was curious, I've not ever really gotten into development involved in real estate, but can we require a geotech report for each lot? Are they going to be doing that?
I guess you could, that's onerous. You really don't. Yeah, you require it based on sort of large geography, and the geotech will go out and they poke holes in the ground. Physically, they'll go out and they'll dig, or they might core sample. And so they'll find areas where this is sand and this is rock and this is clay, and then they apply their build requirements to those specific areas. It's much less lot by lot basis, and kind of we let the professionals go up and do their work and determine where those lines, like the gradients, change. The one thing that we've been asking for, and I think is reasonable to ask for on lots like this, is a post grading on better, what's the word, when you're like the slope map with when the house plans come in. They just basically, yeah, a better grading plan, because we've had a few sneak up on us that are really tall houses, and it was difficult to tell in the house plans until the house went up that, where the real baseline was going to be on that property. And we've had some pushback on that, but I think as we continue to develop up the hillside, that's going to be an important one. But that's a lower level of work than a true geotech per lot. If you're in the HP3 and you're developing like 2-acre lots, sure, maybe we require them to have some level of geotech understanding, because 2 acres is big enough that you're going to change from lot to lot.
So statistically, they kind of do the, a random sample, and this area is going to be this, and this is going to be, okay.
Yeah, and they follow.
I was just curious.
Yeah, they follow existing known fault line maps, and they'll check those areas and streams and other things, and just try to avoid those hazards.
Because there's no doubt, one of the principles of real estate is there is no parcel that's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Especially when we approach a hillside.
If they do a geotechnical report, they may go out and drill 4 to 6 holes and take samples, and that may cover an area that handles 20 to 100 homes. And they use those as representative samples and map out their understanding of what the soils are doing. So,
Thank you.
Councilor Francis, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I have just a question for John. As our city attorney, defensibility. Where are you?
The ordinance?
Oh, there you are. You are there.
I thought,
I heard your
where
voice,
am
I
I
couldn't see you.
philosophically?
So
So,
really losing it there.
so especially when you're talking slopes and hillsides and stuff, there's a lot of defensibility. Because oftentimes, any of these big master plan developments are gonna be governed by a development agreement anyways.
Right.
But these broad safety, we know there's fault lines, we know there's problems in the hillside. So we need to address it, is gonna be, the courts will generally say, yes, you're safe, city. They might reach a point where we've gone too far. I don't know that there's anything in this ordinance that we've gone too far, that we're really pushing the edges of the box.
Okay.
Obviously, there are some things that we've had applicants or landowners respond to saying it's too much, it's too far. Yeah, it is something that always happens. And so that's one of the purposes of this meeting, is to talk about where are there areas that the council has concerns that the staff recommendation is too far. And I don't think anyone's emotionally attached to the ordinance. We just are putting our best foot forward. And I don't think there's anything in here that's illegal or that the city's gonna lose a battle on in court, if that makes sense.
John, you're pretty familiar with other cities' land use, your land use attorney.
Yeah,
Do
and
you feel this is more restrictive than generally we see out there?
I don't know that it's more restrictive. I think it's hard because every ordinance is so different. I was actually it was in the private sector, did some work on the private side and worked for a developer who was building on the hillside, doing kind of a standard subdivision up on the hillside. And they had to jump through a lot of hoops to get what they wanted, putting in extra access roads, injection wells for the stormwater, all sorts of things that in reality, they were able to, it worked out. I mean, they didn't make as much money as they would have liked to have, but they were able to develop a project that they were happy with, that ultimately the county was happy with. So
My defensibility question is obviously from the ordinance itself, but also from what we've done in the recent past. I look at Mason Cove, if we look at the slope map for Mason Cove, it's almost completely in a 20 to 30% zone. Right? And I understand there's some water catchment things that have changed since Mason Cove was platted and approved and all that kind of good stuff. We just don't want to have to go through lawsuits if we don't have to. And so when I look at the slope map of the Mason Cove area, and I look at the lot sizes, what's our defense in saying further up the hill where there's a less concentration of slope that you can't have the same lot sizes?
yeah, so it's all some of it's learning lessons from places like Mason Cove. A good example is the easternmost lots in Mason Cove are the biggest lots in that subdivision.
Right.
And there are some restrictions on what they can do in that portion of the lot, what they can irrigate, what they can't. But I think, it ties back to cities make mistakes,
Sure.
let's not use the example that people use all the time, but let's use Cedar Hills. Cedar Hills approved some homes in spots that they shouldn't have.
Right.
Or that they were developed in a way that caused issues. And so they learned from that, and then they beefed up their ordinances a little bit. Not with the intent of restricting, but with the intent of not having those same issues. Mason Cove, there are some, I think the largest retaining wall is probably 25 feet. It's an engineered retaining wall, but it's massive.
Yeah.
And I think the general feeling from residents is we don't want 25-foot engineered retaining walls.
I agree. And again, I'm not trying to, I just want to make sure that we're making decisions based on objective information, not subjective feelings.
Yeah.
Right? Because some people would be happy with condos up there. Other people would be happy if it were 5 acre lots or greater, and that's all subjective to the individual. And I don't want to, I want to avoid battles over subjective likes and dislikes, and I want to stick to the objective stuff and make sure that we have objective information behind the decisions that we're making, so that we can defend them and say, this is why, there's been changes in the water catchment issues. We've learned from previous experience. All of these kinds of things are objective measures that we can then use to justify the decisions that we're making.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
So let me say one thing.
Councilman Sutton?
I was just thinking, Scott, you guys, this has been vetted so well over the last year and a half. It just dawned on me as I was thinking about this. This reminds me of a lot of Pole Patch over in Pleasant View. Have we kind of looked at do they have like a sensitive lands ordinance, or? Because there's houses in Pole Patch that, they just go right up into those little canyons. At the
A 5
northern
acre
end.
minimum.
What's that?
5
5
acre
acre
minimum.
And they have the 5 acre minimum, but as far as like slope and so forth. I'm just wondering if we've ever looked at what they might have.
And we do have, they're actually up here on this map, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's not perfect, but you can see some of the slopes for Pole Patch
See,
up
they,
in the top left corner.
Pole Patch came out, when I was in high school.
I think that's all like Mason Cove. They've learned not to allow that anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering what we could learn by saying, okay, what did you guys learn doing Pole Patch?
One thing, in Pole Patch, they have some large canyons that come right down near there, that are avalanche prone. And I have seen an avalanche come down and it stopped just shy of the house. But those are some things that probably weren't addressed during the initial layout or studies that were involved in that.
I just wonder if it might be, some of the best learning is learning from other individuals, and wonder if there might be some value of just saying, hey, Pleasant View, what did you guys learn after you put in?
Councilman
Pole
Sutton,
Patch.
that happened when you were in high school. They didn't have cars to get up there.
It's just horses, man. No, I always wanted to have it. Yeah, Pole Patch came in when I was
Those
in high school,
mule-driven drills work really well.
Yeah.
because it was the end of my bow hunting up there.
Good point. Scott, I saw Scott write that down.
Happy to repeat that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Well, Scott, I think if I'm hearing correctly, then what we've talked about tonight, if you get a clean copy and incorporate those things. Council, if you have any thoughts that come a little bit later, call Scott and let's make sure we get that in there. Probably time to quit kicking this down the road and get it done if we agree. So, Scott, thank you. Great work and appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay, we're now on to item number 4. This is a discussion that will be led by John Call, our city manager and attorney. This is a discussion on the North Ogden Connection magazine. John?
Thank you, Mayor. So we've also got Ryan Spouts with the North Ogden Connection magazine here to answer questions and talks about it. The magazine, the contract is up or coming up, depending on which way you look at it. And so the conversation or the question for the council tonight is there's not a new contract being proposed tonight. It's a discussion about what the council would like, what the magazine would like, and where we see moving forward. From the staff perspective, a lot of that background is in here on what the staff expects. And in general, what several of the staff members have said about what they feel that the time or the money or however you want to put it, that the magazine saves the city in utilizing that form of communication. The best comparison we have is if we added an extra sheet that was full color to our monthly utility bills, it would go out to about just over 5,000 homes. And would cost the city about $1,200 to send out because of the printing costs for colored sheets and the folding that with the company that sends out our bills and things. If it was black and white, it would be cheaper, but we estimate that basically the cost to just get the printed materials out would be somewhere between $500 and $1,200 if the city was to do it in-house. That would ignore the time the staff puts in putting the layout together. So probably from a content perspective, the staff would still be doing quite a bit of content, maybe similar to about what we're doing now. Much more mechanical and factual, probably more like my article that's difficult and often painful to read because of the lack of humor in it. But one of the benefits of the magazine is that we get a different artistic touch and a different approach to it. Cost-wise, the new proposed cost is somewhere between the $800 and $900 a month range. It would be based on the number of homes that we're mailing the magazine to, or the number of addresses, and it would be 11 cents per address. Obviously, that's much cheaper than the 24 cents a sheet, in large part because the people who advertise in the magazine are carrying a significant burden of the postage cost, the printing costs, and things like that. The final thing that the city gets a benefit from is we do get that $3,000 a year cost savings for the Cherry Days magazine when we put that together. When we had the self-print, I believe it was costing us between $6,000 and $9,000 a year. With the magazine, if I remember right, it was $4,500 last time. Something like that. It might have been 55. It is a significant investment for Cherry Days. And because there's not advertising or paid advertising in it, in the same way the city carries the major portion of that, although the sponsors for the Cherry Days events do typically, we do bring in enough money to typically cover that cost, or at least come close to that original cost. The flip side of the conversation is, and we and Ryan have talked about this, and a lot of times there's some confusion about what the magazine is, what it represents, whose opinions are in there. You know, we have some discussion about political ads. You know, there's been times in the last state election that we had some ads that we had to edit on the city side and say, oh, you can't do this because it's a political ad. So anyways, we just need to, sorry. So there's the magazine obviously has some positives, has some concerns. I know the council's been approached by different concerns. There are residents who do not like the magazine, think it's a waste of city resources and time. There are residents who wish the city could, in addition to the magazine, do other ways to reach out to residents, because we're not getting the word out as much as we all wish we could. In large part because people, we're either not reaching them where they're looking, or sometimes they're just not looking. And it's, you know, so we're trying to find ways to get out to everybody. It'd probably be good to have Ryan provide some feedback on how he feels like the magazine is going. Ryan Spelt's not Ryan Barker, although we'd be happy for your opinion too, Councilman Barker.
I'm not a journalist.
But just, you know, and really it's the conversation I think tonight is, where does the council and the magazine feel like this should go? And then the staff can work on the path that the two groups talk about tonight. So any questions about the background before Ryan comes up? And I know he's got his wife with him, and I totally forgot her name. Melissa, that's right. And she does a lot of the articles in the magazine. Most of the recipes are ones that are hers or she's stolen from other people. So
You want to hear from Ryan now, council, or do you want to have your concerns expressed so Ryan can answer them? How would you like to go about it?
I think I prefer to have Ryan first.
Okay, Ryan. So I guess sitting on this thing is the appropriate way.
A little awkward for a guy my size. Ryan Speltz.
You can sit in the chair if you want.
That might be a little easier. So a little over 5 years ago, we proposed this idea to Mayor Taylor at the time, and honestly, it's morphed into what it is now, partly through his help and guidance, but also partly just for what it's been necessary to do. Having done this for 5 years now, we have been able to grow. Other cities have found the publication and asked us to come and do it for them. And so that's been exciting and also challenging to be part of, but we've actually got 5 publications now. But North Ogden is dear to our heart. It's where we live, and we love writing the stories about the community and about the people in the community. And the goal of the publication from the beginning is to be a positive source. It is not to be a journalistic piece where it's expressing opinions or debating political topics, which is actually typical for a magazine, especially a lifestyle magazine, to be a lot lighter weight than say what the newspaper would be. And so we've tried to keep to that. That being said, the one consistent request or feedback that I get is, and I just got one just in the recent primary elections, was why don't you at least have a biography of all of the people running and what their stance is somewhere for us to read, you know, and I've heard that many times over the course of doing the publication. As far as feedback that we receive, it is overwhelmingly positive. There are times when people express, you know, frustration and things that we didn't do right, or things that we published or didn't publish. However, for the most part, we hear very consistently gratitude that we have a publication like this, and you know, people expressing what they love about it. We provided, John, is that included in their packet, the info?
It is, yes.
So we've provided some information for you in the packet, excuse me, about the number of people who are seeing this. And just by matter of reference, some of the other cities that we work with, Ogden City recently told us that magazine is actually struggling from an advertiser standpoint. We don't have the support that the publication needs to continue forward. So we're in talks with them about how to fix that. But the city communication director said, you know, this is the most important quiver or arrow in my quiver, because he said, there's no other way that I can guarantee that every single household receives a message. He's like, we can put it on Facebook, we can send out an email, we can do those kinds of things, but this way we know that they at least had a chance to see it because we sent it to their house. And so that aspect is really a powerful tool for, I think, for the city to have and to utilize. I also think that there's ways that the cities could utilize their space a little more frequently with some of the details of what the decisions that the city council is making, and being able to communicate with people what some of the questions or concerns that are coming up. That you know, I have a lot of respect for the work that you guys do here. It's time consuming, it's challenging, it's super important to our city. And I think, you know, I've heard multiple times at meetings the desire from city council to represent the people. And I think the magazine could be a good way to utilize getting the word out and saying, tell us what you think, you know, give us your feedback. And it is touching a lot of people every month, and it's a good way. It's not the only way. And some would argue that print isn't even the most effective way anymore, but it is a good way, and it is very, very popular among the residents. I know I only have the reference of people who I know, and I'm sure they're being nice to me, but people really seem to like it. So.
Any questions for Ryan? I have a couple of questions. The timing sometimes is very important, because we put timeframes in there that we want citizens to know about. I still haven't got my magazine. I generally don't get it until the 7th or 10th of the month. And by then, some of the timeframes are irrelevant. So it makes me a little nervous about putting time-sensitive messages in there, because frankly, it's a little bit embarrassing when the time's passed and then I think on our Meet the Candidates night, on your Facebook page, you know, you kind of created us some grief because you put it on there for Wednesday, the day after it happened.
Yeah.
And so the other thing I have is, in the last issue, there were 3 pages related simply to Ogden City. The last 3 pages of the magazine were all Ogden City events. I'm a little bit puzzled why that's the case. And then I go to Councilman Severing's question here, what can we learn from Pleasantview? Because I understand they discontinued the magazine. Can you help us understand why?
So I'll start at the beginning of that. Number one, with timelines, we have struggled since COVID happened to get the timelines right. And the struggle is getting worse, not better. As you, John has received from our city liaison that there have been, I think I know of 3 and there's possibly 4 major presses that have gone out of business during the COVID quarantine or during shutdown. The challenge that creates for us is that the existing printers are now extremely overrun. And so what used to take 6 or 7 business days to print our publication and mail it is now taking 9 or 10 business days, so 2 full weeks to do the same exact thing that we've done for 5 years. That, and then we also face problems with freight and delivery, so transportation is becoming more and more challenging. Our costs on every front have gone up significantly, so our freight costs are up significantly and they're slower. So we get to pay more and get it a day late, a day slower. Our printing costs have gone up at least 25% just in the last few months. So we're working on a couple of solutions for this. We've known this has been a problem and we're working on it. One option is to publish, you know, starting, especially with the calendar, for example, a week into the next month's events to try and capture, you know, those items of information. And then the other is to move up our deadlines. And so we are attempting to do that now. The challenge you run into with deadlines is the same issue that you were expressing, Mayor, which is, you know, if you go too early on the deadline, you don't even know sometimes what the things are that are going to happen because you're so early in the month, the final dates and times and things haven't been established yet. And so we're trying to find the happy balance there and also try to get the publications done this month, for example. So there's 2 challenges, but the first one was that it took full 10 days, full 2 weeks for the publications to print. And I have an agreement with the printer and I was as mad as you can imagine that they still weren't here. We have advertisers that I get to refund money to because they had Labor Day ads that weren't seen. I will say some magazines did get out and some didn't. So some of it has to do with the local post office and they based on their lack of staffing, if they can take the publications which come in bulk, separate them out into the different routes and have them go out, then they'll do that. And they work hard to try and help us do that. We've tried to maintain a good relationship with them, but sometimes they just don't have the staff to do it. And so the publications sit on their dock for a day or 2 or 3. And so that's outside of our control of, you know, and one issue, but the other, yeah, so those are 2 things that we're working on is trying to fix the deadline and then possibly running at least a week's worth of content into the next, you know, into the next month. So we can say, okay, here's at least the first week so people know and are aware of it. And we are working on making that a little better. We are consistently running into the fact that it's almost 2 months in advance that we're trying to gather that. And those things are not, they're not available. People don't know when dates are, what times are, or they kind of have an idea and then we publish it and it's wrong. We have that happen quite often. And we find out about it sometimes the week after we went to print, and there's not much we can do there. That's a challenge that we face all the time. As far as Ogden content, do you remember? I know of one page we do a local artist spotlight, And we try to find them locally here. They're sponsored, it's a sponsored page though. And so the Bank of Utah is the sponsor. Sometimes they provide the artists that they want us to spotlight. Those are from time to time from Ogden. And then we put art-centric events that happen in conjunction with that. And so I know that was one page that was mentioned to me that was Ogden centric, but do you know what the others were?
John, I went over that with you. Do you remember?
The one that sticks out is that Ogden Mayor's art stroll. Let me
But
see if I can-
there were 3 pages that we went over. Anyway, he's looking at that. I went over with John. There were 3 pages.
Yeah, if there are not specific North Ogden events that are happening during a time, we expand out our search. We try to have the calendar have family fun events, things that are local in the community that we feel like people would enjoy. If there are North Ogden events happening, our goal is to make those front and center and to be the most, the most visible and most important. But I know, for example, I enjoy doing things down in Ogden as well. And I like to have the magazine's calendar be an effective tool for families or individuals to look at and be like, what is there to do this weekend? And that isn't just limited to North Ogden events, but I do want the North Ogden events and the North Ogden magazine to be the front and center there. That would be the goal.
Yeah, we're limited on the space we have, right, Ryan, in the magazine?
Yeah, so in the agreement, I think it's 6 to 8 pages. And then there's an allowance in there if there's something big going on that, as long as we know in advance, we'll make adjustments and make more room for the city because city news and information is crucial. But we're also making moves and adjustments and making content plans constantly and trying to fill in the space that's not filled by the city. And so we're always trying to keep a balance, and it's challenging because magazines are printed on a press. They're printed in 16-page increments. You can choose to do an 8-page increment, which means you're still paying for all 16 pages, but they just don't print on those other ones and they cut them out. But they're done in these big amounts, but you can't just add a page to a magazine and you can't take a page away. They have to be done in 8-page increments in that case.
So
So
are we using our space regularly, Ryan, so we can get information out to the?
I feel like
From your standpoint?
about probably a third of the year, North Ogden uses the full space that they could and should use. But I feel like, and I've given that feedback to John before as well, just saying, I'd like to see more, more of what's city news versus just, oh, we've got basketball coming up, we've got soccer. Those are important things too, but some of the information that the city, what's happening and situations like that, I think would be well served in there.
I know John and myself have had a conversation. He writes out an email of what the responses were to some of the questions in council meeting. That might be worth putting in there to show the follow-up that's taken place. Might be good to have a council member's message in there. Two of their responsibilities they've been assigned. So it would seem like it'd be appropriate for us to try to use the space we're allocated.
And I've made available, Haley is our city liaison, and she's also a writer for the publication. So if there's things where you're like, we need help getting this written, we have an outline or something, we're happy to help with that too. We did not have that when we first started the publication. I was running around with my head cut off, doing everything, my wife and I, everything that it took to make it. But now we have people that can help. So if you need help with writing, we just need to know who to contact, and then who would approve it and
So
make sure it
she'd
happens.
be willing to write the mayor's message for me.
Yeah, she can shadow write for you. Just call and interview you and you tell her what you want to say and then you would approve it.
Perfect. Now we're
I can tell you this, the Ogden mayor does not write his message, so.
North Ogden
Not anymore.
The last question he asked was Pleasant View. So 5 years ago, we approached North Ogden and Pleasant View. For whatever reason, Pleasant View didn't feel like they wanted to reallocate. Our initial proposal was to take the money that the city was spending on creating a newsletter and just the cost of printing and possibly postage, which most cities at that point were still sending primarily paper bills, although that number is decreasing pretty quickly. And so we proposed just for the cost of that, and that's what the city council approved. We've gone more towards a postage sharing approach with additional cities. In fact, our current rate for a city or a county that comes in is 25 cents, which is the full postage to pay to deliver the magazine to every home in the city. It's cheaper than sending a letter because people don't have to think about it. They just put it in every single mailbox. But because we live here, our new proposal is 11 cents per household, which is the lowest amount that we charge. Pleasant View, for whatever reason, at the beginning said no. Their city council felt like their newsletter was fine, and so they didn't do it. I made the decision, and probably in haste, to still send out a Pleasant View magazine. And because every advertiser that I was talking to wanted to go to North Ogden and Pleasant View. And so we made that decision early on. The beginning of the pandemic actually brought to light, I actually did the math and realized how much we were spending to have a Pleasant View magazine with no cooperation from the city. We didn't, they didn't have any approval, they didn't have any space in the publication. They could place ads if they wanted to, but it wasn't their magazine. It was just called Pleasant View. It was primarily the North Ogden magazine. That cost surprised me. It was about $14,000 a year that I was paying to do that magazine. And I was like, that stops right now unless the city's paying their part. We went to the city, the mayor loved it. City council said the same thing. We're fine where we are. And so we immediately ended that publication. Now, the desire for advertisers still remains. They want to go to North Ogden and Pleasant View. So those same people still receive a North Ogden magazine. North Ogden doesn't pay anything extra for that, but the advertisers pay to go to the whole area. And so that way we still can get in front of those people. If Pleasant View wants to be part of the publication, they could still pay for ads to be in it, but they have, again, no space, no say in what's in the publication. Like North Ogden has the right of turning down articles. We've had to redo articles before to make sure we match the city's rules, but we just kind of live in a unique area where this is the most desirable area to advertise to in the county. And because of that, we try to cover all of it. Poor Harrisville, we never went to Harrisville, and we haven't added them in ever, but they don't get publications. There's about 250 houses that happen to be on the same mailing route as North Ogden addresses. And so there's about 250 to 300 of them that get a magazine just by where they, happen to live.
So if I understand this right, Pleasant View gets the same ads, but they have to be punished by my message and John's.
They do, yeah.
And you're proposing to add a council punishment. Wow. Why don't we just annex?
Yeah.
Well, it's council, what questions do you have?
That's how it started.
Any information you need, so as we discuss this in council meeting next week, you'll have the information you need.
That's the questions that I had, so.
Okay, thank you, Ryan.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
So should I plan on being here next week then too?
You're welcome to come next week. You're always welcome.
I don't know if there's more questions come up.
Well, there might, between now and next week, there might be some additional thoughts, and I would encourage the council to pass those on through John so that Ryan's not surprised if there's any additional questions that come up, so he's prepared to answer those.
I'd like to bring up one idea as well. Other cities, and I don't care how you guys handle this, it doesn't matter to me. But other cities allow political advertising in the publication. Every couple of years, we might get a couple of extra ads. But the reason they do is because they said, as long as it's the same for everybody who wants to run an ad, that they pay the same amount, that it's a free opportunity for everybody, then they should be able to do it. I don't care if you want that to be a sold piece where we talk to people running for office and have them have the option of doing it, or the city says, we want to reserve 2 pages and it's not charged, but everybody gets the same amount. But I do think that would be a valuable piece in the publication to have those kinds of conversations, because I'll be honest, in this last, primary election, I had to actually call friends and say, who do you know that's running? I just didn't know I knew some of them that were already on council, but I just didn't know who they were. I didn't know what they stood for. And that's just as a citizen. And so I think that would be very valuable. It'd be something that we, would get some good, reaction from. I think residents would like that. So however the city council thinks would be the best way to do that, I do think it'd be a valuable piece of the publication to figure out a way to have some space, if it's equal space or whatever it is, for people to at least express, here's why I'm running, here's what's important to me in the city. And, I know there's some passionate people running for city council, and unless you know them personally, it's hard to know what, and if you're out of town, like I was for Canada night, you don't get to go and hear what they're saying, and it makes it a little more challenging. So anyway, it's just a thought for the city council, maybe to put some thought into.
I think we just have to be careful since it's kind of the official North Ogden magazine, I think is how it's laid out there.
Correct.
But there'd have to be a disclaimer that, this is the support piece and everyone have to have the equal opportunity.
Yeah.
Some people would interpret that to be, city supporting that particular candidate.
Yeah.
So,
Ryan, are you suggesting just city offices or county, state, federal?
I get the comments on city council especially. I don't get a comment on state, although I think John did have somebody mention something about state. I haven't heard that personally. I've had 10 or 12 over time say, why the heck don't you have this? And I have other people, email me and say, where is this? And then others who have, and I typically forward them the link to the standard examiner piece that they do, but it's on the whole county. And then they just have like a little bio on each person. So it would be nice to have something in the magazine, and then even maybe a little bit more information on the website. And, I'd be willing to facilitate something where we could maybe do video interviews or something and give people a little bit more space or time or something. I'm open to whatever it is. I do know that's a feedback that I get pretty consistently.
Could you
So-
extract, I think, state has a candidate's bio. Could you just extract that, or would that be proprietary to the state website?
That's what the standard does. They pull that information down. I've looked at it, and one of the issues is not everybody puts their bio in there. And so there's times when you'll have someone who will have information and then it's someone who doesn't.
That's their choice, right?
True. And so you could take that approach and we could just take the state information, as long as it's there early enough. That's another issue we run into, because the standards run every day. They can grab the information today and run it tomorrow. Our calendar is just tricky because it's only once a month, so.
But if there's a time frame, they have to have.
So we their deadline for the general election was just September 3rd. It's for them to update it from the primary. So they do
So
it
it's done
fairly,
now.
it should be
Okay.
up to date by now, or at least they've submitted their information. So I do know that it's pretty early.
Yeah. That's something that we could do. We could grab bios off of the state site and make.
And Ryan, I think it's good maybe where there's information about North Ogden, what's going on, that you coordinate that with John.
Okay.
And I'll refer to the Cherry Days situation. I think that once the city made the commitment to participate as much as they could, that wasn't reflected, I don't think, in the magazine. So I think it's just good maybe to, I know we're under time pressures, but maybe to
And-
just run that by John Call.
And I do make that effort, and I did with Cherry Days, that magazine, and we made some actually adjustments according to what Tiffany had requested, because there were events that were specifically city events and then others that were private community member events. And so we actually put them on separate pages and tried to make that signification so that people could tell, okay, this is actually North Ogden city event, and then this is the private citizenry event. And so we tried to make that clear, and we can be more clear, that's part of the reason why there's a 48-hour approval process, is because our goal is really to deliver for the city. We are the city's official magazine. And so we try not to take a role in deciding what that way is. We want to do it the way that you want us to do it. And so if there's a situation where we aren't representing something properly, you'll receive no argument from us in changing it. We work for you, and that is our goal, is to make the city happy and to be a good provider of services for the city. And so if there's a situation where that arises and you notice it, or one of the staff notices, just let us know. We'll redesign it, we'll make it better, we'll fix it however we can. That's what that period's for. So
We'll try to, time constraints.
I know, it's always tricky.
Any other questions?
I've got a question. I was wondering about getting significant agenda items that were up for discussion in city council meetings. If we can have kind of a recap of the significant decisions that have been made to put in there. Maybe John could be kind of our, picker and chooser of, things that are really, when we make decisions, I have questions asked of me. It was like, well, why did you decide that? Especially concerning, the water rates that we did. And we actually sent out a postcard about that. But anyway, I think that might be useful. It might generate a little bit more interest in our decision-making process too, that we get more people to actually come and participate before the decision's made, So anyway, it's just an idea I have.
So I have a comment. I've been sending Katie kind of a little synopsis of what's happened at meetings that she's been putting on Facebook. And that's just what's been going out like kind of the next day on Facebook. Is that what you're looking for, Charlotte? Because a lot of times we're not that far planned ahead for agendas, I guess.
Yeah, Susan, I think it's like the email that John sends out, the follow-up from council items. Maybe we could incorporate that in with what you're doing, so. I think it
just something printed. I think if we could have it in the printed magazine too, like the, city council recap, something, because it's not going to be what we are going to be deciding. It's going to be what we already decided. So again, I'm hoping that if we can just get enough people kind of a part of the process, even if it's after the fact, that they'll maybe want to have some more input before the fact. So that anyway, it's just something I was thinking that, again, your advantage is that it does go to every house. So then as people are reading through not every item is going to interest every resident, but there are going to be some that it's like, whoa, that applies to me and I have an interest in that. And so I don't know if you've got a space or how much you could do, but that might be something we could kind of hash out and make it a little place of like what's happening or what's happened maybe.
One thing I think that could be pretty effective in the publication is guiding people to where the current resources are. Meaning it's too far in advance to know what the agendas and things are for city council, but you could talk about, here were the decisions that were made, or here's a couple of key decisions. Oh, and if you want to know what's coming up, go to this space or this site or whatever, and kind of guide people where they can be most involved. I for personal reasons, gave up Facebook about 3 years ago, and I was having, just personal reasons for not liking my experiences there. And the one thing I miss is North Ogden City info, because a lot of it happens on Facebook. I'm not the only one that I know several personally who've said the same thing to me. They're like, either it was wasting too much time or they were finding themselves emotionally responding to things rather than logically. And so, but I do know if I want to catch up on North Ogden issues, I go to Facebook. And so we can guide people to the right places so they know where they can go to get it and, talk about some of the decisions that were made. And so anyway, just a thought.
Thank you. Okay, see you next week.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item 5.
Thanks,
For tonight. This will be led by John Fuller, city manager and our attorney. And we need to kind of give some guidance on the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA as it's referred to. I believe the state got 1.2 or 1.4 billion. They put 50 million out there available to municipalities. Hopefully that will be amended as they see the need that municipalities have. We need to give John some direction. I've had some discussions with John in regards to particularly water. Maybe seeing if we can't get help on the 2 wells we have, getting the pump houses on those so they're ready to go. Additionally, we've had some discussion about the replacement of the water tank down at 2100. So we just need to give John some direction on what he feels and here he is. Here's Dave hiding behind me, some input from Dave on some infrastructure items. So John?
Thank you, Mayor. So essentially, under the ARPA rules, the simplest way to approach it is there's 3 things you can use it for: broadband, sewer, and water infrastructure. There's some other nuances that are in there on how it has to benefit housing costs or things like that, but that's the generic understanding of ARPA as it's, I think it's only 1,500 pages. And Dave is slowly getting through them. Yeah, about one, yeah. Staff is recommending that the focus be on water. Twofold. One is sewer is doing pretty good. With the lining that the council's been doing or been authorizing, our sewer system is really in pretty good shape. We're catching up. In fact, those liners are better than the old pipe because they'll last longer because it basically creates a sandwich. Anyways, we don't need to go into that. But then the other question is, would the council want to explore the use of this for broadband, which would be a fiber type infrastructure? Trouble is, as council remembers, to do that citywide, it would be about $18 million. And so I guess staff felt that probably was not the path the council would want to use. So we focused on the water side of things. And Dave put together this list of the projects that we specifically have planned coming in the next several fiscal years, which are everything that the mayor just mentioned. There's various water lines. There's some water line upgrades, where we put $400,000 into it. And then as well as some additional projects, the mayor was just talking about taking the 2 wells that we have drilled that are currently not producing water because we haven't had a need for them, and turning them into, so they're capable, so they can pump the water, they can do that. Or they can provide water if one of our other wells went dry or if a pump went down or something. We have several redundancies built in, and this will just give us more redundancies, as well as future capacity. So the question is really, does the council, of those 3 options, do you like going with the water option? And if the answer to that is yes, then the next thing we would suggest is we submit for a portion of the state $50 million that they put on the table to go to one of these projects that we already have planned, where we have a good chance of success, because let's take the top one, the 2 million gallon water reservoir. That's a project that's shovel ready. Basically, we're good to go as soon as we finish a few design things and get the property finalized. We've got funds to pay for it, meaning that we have a good match for the grant from the state, and it's in the window of the timeline that the ARPA funds want it to be spent, so it'll be completed in the timeline, which technically is stretched out now, I think, to 2026. So but we've got all the stuff together. Oh, and it actually, this tank will provide water for the I don't want to say lower side of the city, because it's the majority of the older homes in the city are in this area that are served by this tank. And so it actually provides a chance to provide some necessary infrastructure for those type of homes, as well as replace a tank that is 50 years old.
Yeah, a little over.
So it's nearing the end of its useful life. And so so we have all these projects. I guess the real question is, like I just said, is water okay for the council? And then are you okay? We were thinking of requesting, after talking with the finance department, we're going to ask for $1 million of the 50 million the state has available, and see where our cards lie. The mayor wants to ask for 5.
Well, I think, John, if you ask for $1 million, you're gonna get it cut back. If you ask for $5 million, you're gonna get it cut back. I think these are legitimate projects. My concern is if we put some of these smaller ones on there that we know we're capable of doing on our own, that's what they might fund
Mhm.
versus some of these other ones that I think are necessary. So I'm for asking for more than $1 million. They can only tell you no if you ask. If you don't ask,
And that's a great idea that we don't send them the whole list. We say, this is the project. In fact, the Fruitland Drive booster and property is tied to the 2 million gallon reservoir because they're in close proximity and they interact together. So we might be able to put those together as one project and say it's a $3.2 million project.
well, I think, water is a big thing right now, right? We're a growing city. We've got to enhance, our infrastructure in that regard. We've got the wells drilled. Putting the pump houses on there seems to be a legitimate ask, but anyway, council, did you have a comment, Councilman?
Yeah, this is, as I was reading your staff report, John, this would be additional money on top of the 2.4,
Right.
right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
And we can use the 2.4 as part of the match for the money we're requesting from the state.
Right.
So,
But even the 2.4 and this additional still have the same 3 sewer, water, broadband, infrastructure restrictions.
the state money is tied much more to, and at least in the scoring sheet, to housing affordability, things like that. So as we put together our application, we'll need to focus on how it benefits the housing affordability in the city. And a good example is if all of these projects were paid for by a grant, for example, a good portion of them are impact fee eligible projects that would lower the impact fees for future homes and make it a little more affordable.
We're hoping the state will, once they see the need of municipalities, they'll up the 50 million that's available.
Yeah.
And they got 1.4 billion.
Yeah, so there's 50 million for. So there's $50 million for the 246 cities and counties. Is what so that's not going to be split a lot of ways. I think that comes out to 200,000 apiece. But there'll be some cities that aren't ready to apply for it and others who will probably get more because they might have a bigger need. So we just want to put our best foot forward. So, yeah.
Well, no, I'm sorry, John, I was just gonna say, in my opinion, that's where we need to focus that money as water. John, Dave, which one of these items was, remember when we went on that little water tour and I dropped down into the,
Yeah, so that's the Fruitland Drive booster and property, which is
Booster
number 4.
okay,
And that's exactly, like John was talking, that we should probably combine number 4 and number 1 together and call that one project. I mean,
after seeing
and after you got to see.
what was down underneath there that was as rusted as it was, it's gotta be a top priority.
So those first 3, just to give you guys some insight, the first 3, you guys, or that is what we actually budgeted in this year's budget. So 1,500 to 1,700 on Washington Boulevard, that's the water line that will feed down near that Cooperstown development. Fruitland Drive will bring it from about 2,550 all the way down to 2,100 booster station. That's another major one because we've had so many leaks and stuff that's actually it's flooded homes and different things that we need to get rid of that pipe. And then we've talked about the tank as well. The rest of the stuff is not budgeted at all.
So where are the pump houses? Is that?
Sorry, I didn't put them on there. So they were each about, they worked out about 350 each.
So these were the ones that we had kind of programmed ready to,
Already.
that were kind of, and so we didn't add those in
But we
until today when we were talking.
Yeah, I think you and I had a discussion about that. It
Yeah.
seems like, we're using our wells that we haven't used before. And looking ahead, with growth, we ought to get those functional.
So one would be about 300,000. That's because it's in the canyon. It's really close to the reservoir site. So the telemetry and all that stuff will be a lot easier. The other one's about 400,000 because we could add a booster to help send more water up towards the cove tank, which would kind of circulate our whole system. So
What's your take, Dave, on getting those ready to go? Do you think that's premature, or should we be thinking ahead to get those done?
no, I mean, I definitely think, we own the property, we have the wells ready to go. I mean, it just needs a building on top of it.
Yeah, we know there's water in it, so.
What are the two wells?
So there's one up North Ogden Canyon, just right below.
Right.
And then the other one's at the very top of 1050.
Right, the one that, yeah, remember the drill on that.
Any objections to recommendation to concentrate on water? You want to ask for 1 million, or want to ask for more?
The answer is always no unless you ask.
I think 5,030,000.
Well, plus there's another 700.
Yeah, plus, like I said, if we
$6
take
million.
some of these other things off, to give you insight, the bottom one was on there because I'll just, I've always wanted to keep that. We ran into the meter thing, remember about 10 years ago, where everybody was like, wait a second, we didn't know that we had a meter problem, right? Not that we have a SCADA problem, but our SCADA is 30 years old. We've updated it multiple times, so the SCADA itself is not 30 years old. But the company is, and they're a local company. They're very small, they're family ran. So if they decided one day either to sell that company to somebody else or decided to retire because it's two older gentlemen, that would be something that we would.
How old?
They're older than 25.
But they've been working for 30 years.
That we would have to make that a decision to keep that infrastructure trying to keep going or kind of switch to newer technologies or different, I shouldn't say newer technology, different technologies, right? And so I always try to keep that on there just so that, we're never shocked by anything as far as when we talk about capital, but that's definitely way down on the list.
So there's really two categories here. There's increasing capacity, and there's kind of repairing
Yes.
and upgrading. I'm wondering, if they're gonna lean more towards increasing capacity with what's going on with water versus repairs, but
And I think you're 100% right. The other factor into that too is, tell me if I'm wrong, John, but from what I understand, everything has to be American made, right?
So, yeah, so there's some,
Expanding
yeah.
that capacity is probably the easiest to stay American made, right? Like, I mean, if we're gonna do a concrete tank, concrete's here, that's, we can get rebar here, we can do like those kind of things, local. Where if we do pump house and SCADA and that kind of stuff, that you're now talking about companies that are outside the United States that might hurt that look too. So I think that's something we have to look at.
Well, I think focusing on the new stuff allows us to reduce the impact fee pieces because we couldn't use impact fees on repair
correct.
anyway.
And the other, as Dave mentioned, all these things are in the budget right now, all the June 22 ones. And so what you can see is that we've been saving up for these projects. If we can get the grant to cover them, then we have the ability to take that money and use it for the projects that are further out. And we need to explore new wells. We need to, there's all these little things that add up so quickly, and it'd be nice to be able to use the federal grant money so that we don't not wipe out, but reduce our fund balance so far that we'd have to save up again for the big projects.
Absolutely. And then it opens up, like number 6, for instance, that eye hydrant. It's actually a really neat technology. It's only $2,000. I say only $2,000. It's $2,000. You put it. It's the ugliest. But these hydrants go around your system. They actually can monitor pressure changes and different things. They can send you alarms.
so that like we always know where our system is at pressure wise. If anybody's flowing a lot of water on a certain part of town, we can know those kind of things. And so, but yeah, then we can take that technology, we can use those other things towards technology like that. And put those around our city too.
I think emphasizing the fact that we have the funds to match. I know when I was out with the WACOG, most cities who were willing to participate got a higher grade than those that just wanted everything kind of handed to them.
Yeah.
So I think that's one good position there, so.
Dave, you mentioned on that water tour that day, well, I guess it was actually Jason who mentioned there wasn't some way of being able to capture the water that gets dumped out once they get too full.
Yeah, and so that
Is there anything there?
Yeah, the flow meters number 5 for the reservoirs. So that would actually do the metering on the outlet side of the reservoir, so we know what we are sending into the creeks or a way to actually, we've talked with you actually sending that down different well casings or different things we can do
To capture it,
to capture that water.
so we don't lose it.
Yes.
Okay, you got your direction, I think. Anything else?
Excuse me. Bless you.
Okay, so we will get the application that's due by September 15th, so we'll get it in.
Anything else you need?
Nope.
On item 6 then, if there's any further public comments, if people would like to make a decision, now would be the time.
Where do we go?
We're over here now.
All right, it's been a minute since I
3 minutes.
sat in a public council meeting. I'll put the timer on me now.
I got it going, I know.
All right, so I'm John Call. It's probably been 4 or 5 years since I've been to a city council meeting. I was pretty involved from about 2014 to 2017. I had to kind of bow out for school. I got deployed overseas in 2018, came back, but followed Brent Taylor through a lot of the Village of Prominence Point issues, a lot of the amphitheater issues, things like that, things that I'm seeing come up again. And I'm hearing things like there was never a plan, why wasn't this funded, stuff like that. Well, I know that there's some people on the council and in this room that were here when this stuff was proposed, and there's always been a plan. There was funding proposed. And so why is it coming up again 5 years later? And then why are we talking about new stuff without addressing some of our older projects? So I wrote down a few of them that I can remember. Our dog park, when we first put it in, we proposed it as a temporary thing. There's a location at 850 East. That hasn't come up again, but driving past it, I drive past it every day to work. Just on my way here, there was about 12 cars that I could count just as I cruised past. So that's an outstanding thing. The amphitheater is outstanding. It's a plan that needs to be completed. I know it's stalled. I know why it's stalled, but it's not like there wasn't a plan. It's not like there wasn't funding proposed. It stalled for reasons that we really couldn't control, but let's finish that before we move on to things like our pickleball courts. Trails around North Ogden. There's been talk about trails for a long time, but I commute on the trail a couple days a week following the canal road, and that trail is not maintained. It's a mess up there. So if we're going to put in trails, we should at least have some sort of plan to maintain them. Daylighting Coldwater Creek, there's been some that's come up a little bit. I've seen it on the Facebook pages. I think it came up as a topic during our Meet the Candidates. We hired Mayor Godfrey to give us a whole plan for that at one point. So that's coming up again, and we're pretending like it's new. It's new to everybody, and I'm a little bit frustrated I hope you guys can understand that frustration. And then another thing that's kind of a hanging chat out there is our city pond. We funded the pipe to go there, but we're not doing anything with it, but we're talking about new stuff. Well, why talk about new stuff when we've got all this stuff that's hanging out there that needs to be completed? Public safety building, that I absolutely agree needs to be addressed right now. And that's a new thing that's come up in the last few years. But I just would like the city council to acknowledge that there's been plans and that none of this stuff is new. And I'd like to see it follow through, or at least some reasons why we haven't completed it. And then I appreciated the comments earlier today about Village of Prominence Point, the people that have moved in there and their disappointment with what's happened there. I participated in that from the very beginning, when we finally started approving the development over there. And I think the city's bent over backwards to accommodate that developer. We changed our setbacks, we changed our height restrictions. I just found out the other week that we decided that a 4-story apartment building was okay, when in the beginning we said 4 stories. I know there was concerns about the ladder trucks in North Ogden being able to reach that top story. So I don't know where the 4-story thing came from. Like I said, I kind of bowed out about 2017 for personal reasons. But we adjusted the setbacks. When I drove past, I went out there the other day, and the city agreed there would never be a pathway through 300 East. And I drove past and there's a sidewalk, dead ends right up against the fence. So that indicates to me that the developer still thinks there's a chance that he can put something through on 300 East. And I saw some documentation that kind of supported that. So I'm disappointed that we haven't held them accountable. And I know the people that have moved in there feel like they've been kind of slighted, sold on something that they're not getting what they paid for. So if the city council can consider all the things that we have hanging out there, and then just have that follow through, and then hold our developers accountable. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Just for your information, we have set aside the funding for the park pond. We're waiting on the federal government on the grant. So that money has been set aside in our capital projects fund. Some of the others have not. Some of the things that were talked about and how that was going to be funding have never come about, but we haven't given up on that yet. We're having discussions on that, but you're always welcome to come down and talk with us and get updates on things. And thanks for your comments tonight. Anyone else this evening? John, Susan, anybody electronically?
JD.
Oh, hey, JD. Didn't see you come in.
Hey there, JD Delphas, North Ogden resident. I love the idea of using ARPA funds for water. I think that you're heading in the right direction on that. I'm just curious on the wells that need to be tapped at the top of 1050 and North Ogden Canyon. How much will that alleviate our pumping that we've been surcharged to pay more for because of the drought? Hopefully 1050 and North Ogden Canyon will help a lot with that, but that's just one question I have.
That's correct.
So it would have helped a ton, because what happens is both of those wells would actually feed into Rice Creek. And Rice Creek can actually feed about 70% of our city. So instead of having to pump down here on the flats and then boost it up to 1050 and then boost it up again, we would actually be able to fill the reservoir. Well, the one in North Ogden Canyon would be able to fill that reservoir and feed the lower half, which would mean that Rice Creek could feed the upper half. And the one at the top of 1050, we could actually put right into that same system. So it would not have to make us boost the water as much. So definitely would help.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I had a citizen hit me up that had a misunderstanding, and they said it was on the postcard. I didn't read it that way, but the increase was for infrastructure. My understanding was that was simply to cover the increased electrical bill for the company. And then we committed that once the stream started flowing again, we would reduce that. So I just wanted to clarify that it has nothing to do with infrastructure. It was simply to cover the cost of the additional pumping, which is about 10 grand a month, right?
Yeah, at least.
So,
Dave, and if I remember right, that well at the top of 1050, that'll gravity feed into Rice Creek, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to
feed it
pump
into-
that.
Yeah, into that system, which
Right.
will either basically go into the tank or go into the system that feeds. So
they both already get water, we know there's water.
Yep.
So it's just getting it out. So. Okay, anyone electronically? Anyone else have something they'd like to help us with this evening? All right. Let's move on to item number 7, council, mayor, or staff comments. Let's start with the council. Councilman Barker, do you have anything?
Nope.
Councilmember Stoker?
No.
Councilmember Severing?
Not tonight.
Councilmember Swanson?
Waiting for that look.
Is that a no or?
That happened pretty quick, no.
Councilmember Ekstrom, do you have anything for us?
I'm gonna miss that.
Nope, I think all my questions were answered and everything I wanted to say has been said.
I just wanted to mention that we had a site visit today from potential contractors on the public safety building. And John did a great job of answering the questions, and we took a tour, showed him the site, some of the challenges to overcome. So things are moving along there. I think they have till September 27th to submit any additional questions. John, is that correct?
Yes.
But there was some significant interest from people today. Also, council, I've received several emails from residents who would like their emails read in council meetings. I think we've set the precedent to do that, so I feel an obligation for the ones I have. My question is, do we want to continue that on when there's options to either join electronically, send it via chat, or attend the meetings? What's your preference? But next council meeting, I will be reading at least one email regarding the use of the amphitheater and how we can increase participation there. Any comments? Councilman Barker.
I'm of the opinion we have enough avenues. If they want to make a comment, they can make a comment. Otherwise, we're just gonna open ourselves up to be reading emails for hours on end.
I agree.
I guess, how many do you use a gift?
Oh, I could get 1 or 2 a week, depending on the week.
And they're asking for,
For it to be read in the council meeting.
But if they
I
know
feel
that
the
we're
ones
gonna
I've
read
got-
them, we'll get more.
Yeah, the ones I've got now, I feel an obligation to read, but I'm
See,
just
that's
saying, going forward.
My concern is similar to Councilman Barker's on the time. You end up with, 10 emails. That could start eating up quite a bit of time.
As long as they can be read in 3 minutes, I guess we're okay.
Well, like Councilman Barker said, we already have several avenues to make comment in public meeting.
We've got Zoom, they can actually speak or they can chat, they can attend the meeting. Anyway, we'll discuss that next meeting if you just be thinking about it. No, we're not making any decisions tonight. John, Susan, do you have anything?
I have 8 things.
Well, you probably be talking to yourself.
The rest of us will leave and you and Cheryl can ask this.
Two of them are related. Lauren and Scott are working on Site Triangle. And I know that it was brought up last meeting, the Site Triangle on Washington, or on 2700 was actually approved and engineered by UDOT with Cherry Springs Villas. So that Site Triangle meets the UDOT standard, which satisfied our engineering standards. We do need to follow up on the council member getting involved with Ogden Regional and doing that update with the.
Thanks, John. What's his name, Billy?
Craig?
Craig would like the council members, see if there's some time they could meet with him and administrators of Ogden Regional since we kind of are using that Pleasant View emergency room, just kind of give an update and see what concerns we have. So I don't know if you're interested. I know Councilman Severing and myself went last year, but he's asked if we could have a time in the morning, or maybe just meet for breakfast or something. So if you just let Susan or John know your availability, that'd be good.
Currently with COVID coming back on, we've been planning on doing our council meetings by limiting it again to the public to 15 people in person, and then doing spacing like we are. Anyone object to that or have another thought? If not, you can email me. I won't read it in council meeting though. And then planning commission is going back to the duplex ordinance in the RCC area to have that conversation. Those concrete washouts that you had asked about, Councilman Swanson, Dave and his team took care of those issues. In that email I sent you, council, please look at the Utopia survey. They committed that if we had issues with the questions, we could get them rewritten before it's sent out to the public. So just please look at that. I can resend that if you'd like. In fact, I will resend that just to make it easier for you to find. And then the last thing on the trail crossing on 2750, the chief and his team looked at those and is recommending that we indicate those as crosswalks. The majority of the issue is people not yielding to traffic and just running or biking straight out across the road without looking. And so he's recommending that we just provide some additional warning. He mentioned when he was out there, he had someone run out in front of his vehicle. So he had to slam on his brakes. And he also has identified a few other crossings of the trail where we need to just enhance the visibility.
Probably on Mountain Road, Don, too, there where it crosses Mountain Road, get on the canal.
Yeah, he went and looked at every single, and so Dave's team is gonna, they're getting it striped here in the next month.
Yeah, the next week.
And then we are looking at the possibility there'll be some signs. The lights are a little hard because people who are running out into the street don't stop and hit the light button. But we are looking at that option as well. So that's all 8.
John,
Yes.
on that, up on 2750, some of that, is that the city's right away on the shoulder part? Because on where you come across there are 2 trees that you have to really come out in the road to even see what's coming down or up. It's just right where both of those cross. There's they're junk trees.
Are you talking about 2600? Or you come to the stop?
2650.
26.
Okay.
Anything else?
That's everything I've got, Mayor.
Susan, do you have anything?
By Browns.
By who?
Councilmember Stover, did you have a
Motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn? Do we have a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor of adjourning the meeting?
Aye.
Thank you. Thanks for coming tonight.
Right down to the Browns. Right there.